crowded today. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to First Wednesdays. My name is Lucinda Walker, and I'm the director of the Norwich Public Library. And I would like to introduce to all of you who may not know, this is Sarah Rooker, who is now the new director of the Historical Society. And this is the 9th year that the Historical Society and the library have joined together to co-host First Wednesday. So it's very exciting. I'm already thinking we should plan something for 10th year next year. First Wednesdays is a program of the Vermont Humanities Council, and it is co-hosted by our two organizations. We receive funding from the following wonderful and generous organizations: the Friends of the Norwich Public Library, the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation, the Ledyard National Bank, Mascoma Savings Bank, and the Norwich Historical Society. Tonight, Mary Otto will be introducing Mr. Arnowit. Mary is a new board member of the Vermont Humanities Council, but I would also like to say she is a wonderful volunteer at the library and also served on the library's board, so she's very close to all of us. So at any rate, welcome Mary.
Yep.
Introducing Michael.
Good evening and welcome to the First Wednesday in Norwich. There are 3 additional sponsors that I would like to mention and thank. First of all, the Vermont Department of Libraries. Secondly, the National Life Group Foundation, whose goal since its inception in 2006 has been to do good in the communities in which they live and work by supporting nonprofit and educational organizations. And third, our very own Stave Puzzles, whose commitment to family fun and devotion to puzzle making has transformed the idea of the jigsaw puzzle from a simple diversion into expressive and entertaining art. Tonight's performance lecture is a special treat for the heart and mind. Michael Arnowit has been called one of the most creative and imaginative pianists in today's classical music world. He has performed with orchestras throughout the US and Europe. He is known for the beauty, clarity, and elegance of his musical ideas, and for his abilities to find new articulations and colors from the piano. The internationally renowned flautist and composer Louis Moise, who died 9 years ago at the age of 94, said, "During my long musical career, I have met few really great artists in the various disciplines of the field, and I'm very pleased to name Michael Arnowit, pianist and musicians, as one of them. He expresses his art on the highest level. I have great respect for his interpretations and his way to communicate music to an audience, and his love of music." In 1989, Michael began his novel, 26-year-long presentation of the complete 32 Beethoven piano sonatas, matching up his age as he performs the various sonatas with Beethoven's age as Beethoven composed them. The 8 concerts in the project, spaced out over 26 years, thereby become a study in the psychology of aging and development. The project ended last year with a program of Beethoven's last 3 piano sonatas. One of the concert performance locations was right here in Norwich. Last year, Michael toured Korea, where he gave 10 performances, and he is planning a larger multi-country tour of Eastern Asia for 2017. Michael Arnowit was born in Boston, Massachusetts, but fortunately for us, he has lived in Montpelier for more than 30 years. Please join me in welcoming him to Norwich.
Thanks. That's a nice introduction. Thank you, Mary. And it's a real pleasure to be with you to explore together some things about Beethoven, his music, and his creative process. I brought along with me to share with you some of the sketches that Beethoven made for his Tempest Sonata for piano. And by the way, we have a handout of some of these sketches, so if any of you don't have a handout and would like one, maybe you can raise your hand, we can try to get you one, but I think they try to put them on the seat. But it's definitely not required that you be able to read music, because you can just listen and you'll get everything that way as well. But if you'd like a handout and you don't, raise your hand, we'll try to get you one. So what we're going to do together is go through some of the interesting details of these sketches, compare them with the final version, and at the end of the program, I'm going to play for you straight through the entire opening first movement of the Tempest Sonata. So that, in a nutshell, is what we have on tap for tonight. I think there'll be a question and answer period when I conclude. And I'm really happy to meet any of you at the end of the night. I think they've got a table set up in the back that has some of my recordings from the past, and I'll be there. So I'll be happy to meet you, hear your reactions to the presentation program. I do have a mailing list. I'd love to keep in touch with you. I'll be actually making 2 recordings next year. One, my first jazz recording ever. I'll be doing that in New York City at a really wonderful old historic recording studio there with about 12 other musicians. So it'll be all my own jazz music. So that's an exciting project for me, and I definitely have it on tap that I will try to make a recording of the last 3 Beethoven piano sonatas next year too. So if you'd like to get little notices when I give concerts around Norwich, or when these recordings come out, please sign up on that mailing list. And that's the end of my commercial. So away we go with Beethoven and his sketchbooks. Well, Beethoven was certainly obsessed his entire life with trying to find his own identity, both personally and musically. And maybe we're not overly concerned with all of his personal eccentricities and quirks, although he had many. For example, every day he'd get up and he would count out a really precise number of coffee beans, no more, no less, very obsessive about it, to grind to make his morning coffee. Or I recently learned in a biography that came out last year that Beethoven really had trouble adding up a large column of numbers. So for example, he was always in money trouble, so he had like lists of expenses. He wanted to add up these numbers of his expenses. So say he had an expense that was 4, an expense that was 3, an expense that was 9, an expense that was 2. And we would just put them all in a column, add them up, and we'd be done. Beethoven couldn't do that. He'd write them all down that way, but then he'd add the 4 and the 3, and he'd write that in a little sub-column, and he'd draw a line under it, and come up with 7. Then he'd put the number, he'd again write the number 7 on the top of another column. He'd put the 9 under the 7, add those 2 together, and get 16. Then he'd write the 16 up at the top of another column, put the 2 under that, finally grand total 18. So, this is supposed to be one of the greatest geniuses that ever lived, and he can't do first grade math. So no, we're not overly concerned with his personal quirks, but it's his drive to find his own musical identity, and that quest that really intrigues me. For you see, as great as Mozart was, he didn't want to be another Mozart. And as great as Haydn was, and Haydn was even a teacher of Beethoven's for about a year, he didn't want to be another Haydn. He wanted to find out who Beethoven was. That was his lifelong quest. There's a really wonderful and revealing comment he made to Prince Lichnowsky, who was one of his patrons. And he said this: "Prince, what you are by the accident of birth. What I am of myself. There are and there will be thousands of princes. There is only one Beethoven." Well, that's a hell of a thing to say to your patron, especially. But this attitude was new. Beethoven wanted to chart his own course, both as a composer and as a person. He wanted to be financially self-reliant, not dependent on the church, the courts, or the state. Freedom, individual freedom, was his most important ideal. So maybe it's not coincidence that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was played when the Berlin Wall came down, or at the Chinese democracy protests in Tiananmen Square. We have this romantic image of the composer, antisocial, intense, obsessed, driven with total dedication to create great original works of art. Well, that really began with Beethoven. Great composers who preceded Beethoven, Palestrina, Vivaldi, even Bach and Mozart, weren't concerned with creating their own individual musical identity. They considered themselves to be composing in the context of the musical traditions and the social institutions of their time. So for Mozart, it was the court, the aristocracy. For Bach, it was the church. They didn't have Beethoven's musical struggle to create. Hey, Bach, we need another cantata for Sunday. Sure, no problem, Bach would say. But reading Beethoven's writings is so different. He said, art always demands of us something new, which we take for granted today, that a classical composer is expected to try his best to create something original, interesting, and fresh in each and every new piece of music they create. But at the time, this attitude was very new. So with Beethoven, there's this sense of questing, and you can almost feel that questing quality listening to his music. So before we go further, I just want to go over with you here the meanings of two musical terms that I'll be using from time to time here tonight. Beethoven's music is not based on flowery, gorgeous melodies. Rather, like a good architect, his music has a foundation of simple building blocks. And the two musical elements that Beethoven uses the most are the scale and the arpeggio. A scale is stepwise motion, either going up or down. Sound familiar? That's the scale. Okay, the scale, we can have a scale, can be a major scale. This is a C major scale, which I picked because it only uses the white keys of the piano. Or it can be minor. Here's the C minor scale, which uses some of the black keys. So that's the scale, linear, stepwise motion. The other basic musical element that Beethoven uses the most is called the arpeggios. And this is an Italian word that means a strummed chord. Now normally with a chord you hear all the notes struck simultaneously. So here's a C major chord. Now imagine a guitarist plucking through the notes of the chord one by one. Pluck, 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 pluck. And that's the arpeggio. It's a strummed chord, and an arpeggio must go in a certain consistent direction. So it's either going up, like the one I just played, or it can be downward. And again, it can be in major or minor. And one thing you'll notice about these arpeggios is that between two notes of an arpeggio, it never moves to the next note on the piano. Never moves to a neighboring note. I'm always leaping or jumping. There are gaps between each note. And because my fingers have to leap from note to note in an arpeggio, they tend to produce a strong detached sound compared to a scale which has a smoother texture, right? So that's the end of the music theory class, and it didn't hurt too bad, did it? So again, a scale is linear motion, and an arpeggio is that strummed chord, gaps between each note. So I mentioned earlier that Beethoven had this drive throughout his entire life to try to find his musical identity. And one thing that you really find in Beethoven's signature musical character traits is his interest in differentiation, by which I mean how to make passages of music sound distinctly different from each other. And from the time way back, like if you go back in music history to the ancient Greeks, and you go up from there all the way up to Mozart, who just directly preceded Beethoven, I think you'll find that music is really based on unity and homogeneity. You started a piece of music in a certain way, and by and large you kept that basic texture going. You didn't rock the boat. Beethoven had new ideas. Music could be based on dramatic contrast, gut-wrenching changes in incredibly short periods of time. Textures were brilliantly defined, and Beethoven would move from one to another in quicksilver fashion, or combine textures together in diverse artistic ways. The net result was a listening experience of odyssey, of journey. Beethoven's music is strong and powerful. You cannot listen to Beethoven in a detached, objective way. His music draws you in for an emotional and spiritual roller coaster ride. Beethoven's music was the real turning point. It was the moment when music became no longer secondary to a religious service, to dancing, or to your noble friends looking around at your nice-looking palace. Music was now no longer background, but commanded your full, complete attention. And in this way, Beethoven really changed the way we listen to music. Each one of Beethoven's 32 piano sonatas is a little different from each other, individualized in a most amazing way. Each one is a very personal piece, and I think Beethoven truly lived up to his own creed, to always do his very best to try to create something new in every piece of music. How did Beethoven create this new music of dramatic contrast and textural differentiation? One thing is he liked to use extremes. As a pianist, he was known, supposedly had this reputation for breaking pianos, presumably from playing the loud chords, loud passages too loud for the more fragile wooden frames of the time. This piano, no hesitation, no problems, don't worry, I'm not going to break this piano. But back then, I guess he did. And as a conductor, there are reports that he would sometimes crouch down to try to induce his orchestra to play even softer. Then he would suddenly jolt upright for one of his explosive, surprise, explosive moments of musical outbursts that we know from listening to his famous symphonies. Surprise? Surprise was another way Beethoven would stimulate the attention of the listener. As a conductor, they say he would occasionally make these wild arm or even elbow jabs to induce his orchestra players to do these sudden accents, these surprise accents that he liked to write in his music. Now, I think you'll be able to hear some of these trademark Beethovenisms in this first excerpt I want to play for you. For those of you who want to follow along, this is on the first page of your handout. It's from his Sonata number 4. It's only opus 7, so this is an early piece Beethoven wrote when he was in his mid-20s only. Yet it is unmistakably Beethoven. So I'll play it for you first, and then I'll tell you a few things about it. So this is the opening of this Sonata number 4. right? Yeah. If you want to hear the rest of the sonata, you have it on CD. I promise you not. So this music begins with this interesting pulsating music. It's full of brimming energy, yet to be played softly, which is unusual because fast music is usually played loud, but not here. And he begins with those pulsations, and then they get transferred from my left hand, where they're those repeated notes, to my right hand, where they are transformed to swirls. This circular motion. So this is a good example of Beethoven's quick textural changes, right? This is just within seconds. He's changing it from texture number 1. Now, the swirls. That's texture number 2. So the rhythm of each texture is actually the same. Versus, it's the same rhythm, but the shape of the notes has been radically changed. So you get this running pattern of notes, and it keeps going on. Keeps going on and on. Now the swirls pass to my left hand. Now we're going to hear some scales going up and down. Still, the music is soft. Again going up, and again going down. And whoa! What happened there? That was a typical Beethoven surprise jolt. The music of the first 4 lines was all setting you up for this moment. All of that soft music, soft music, soft music, soft music gave you an expectation that it would continue. But then Beethoven throws in this very loud chord, which he marks F, F fortissimo, which means very, very loud. Right? And it's this very, very disruptive chord. It reminds me of, you know, those stereotypic bad mystery novels that always have to begin with the words, "It was a dark and stormy night," etc., etc. Then suddenly a shot rang out. Sort of analogous to that. And it's just such a jarring chord, but it's interesting to look at the chord because basically it's a simple E-flat major chord, but with a dissonant D-flat placed in the extreme bass. And it's these 2 neighboring notes, D and E, kind of rubbing up against each other, that gives this chord its unique sound. That's great writing. And one thing that's interesting about it is that, well, let me tell you something about that chord. One thing you could think about is, I want you to hear a comparison to what it would have sounded like if he had not put that D flat in the, underneath the entire chord as he did. What if he had put it up here in the middle of the chord? Here it is, near middle C, so it's really in the middle of the chord, the middle of the piano. He could have put that added D flat note way up here. And I'm going to play for you this kind of alternative version. Imagine an alternative universe, and Beethoven has now decided to write it this other way, which he did. And I think you'll hear when I get to this chord that it will have much less impact. So I'm going to give you a running start, play you a little bit of the measure before this music. So this is the soft music that's played to set up the surprise chord. And here it comes. Right? Doesn't that sound a lot more ordinary? Compare this to what he actually wrote. Here's the lead in again, and we're coming to it. Right? Placed at the bottom, it really growls down there. So, let's get on to my main subject. subject with you here tonight, which is Beethoven's sketchbooks. And I've just always been fascinated by the studies that have been made of Beethoven's sketchbooks. We all know Beethoven had unbelievably sloppy handwriting. He was forever castigating his copyists, once writing to his publisher, "Mistakes, mistakes, you yourself are a unique mistake." But of course, it wasn't really their fault. And it's only been in the last few decades that music scholars have been able to decipher Beethoven's scrawl on the over 8,000 pages of sketches that have survived. And these sketches are being transcribed from the original handwritten form to normal printed music for us to study and enjoy. And some of these transcriptions of these sketches are what I didn't want to make you have to try to read his handwriting. So these transcriptions are what you're going to get in your handouts as we go along here. Interestingly, a surprising amount of Beethoven's music was composed outdoors. Beethoven loved nature and every day went on a lengthy walk, either in the city or the country, in which he would sing, hum unintelligibly, so they say, and jot down sketches on loose sheets of paper or notebooks that he would carry around with him. Beethoven wrote, "I am rambling about in the mountains, ravines, and valleys here with a piece of music paper. In order to gain some leisure for a great work, I must always scrawl a good deal beforehand." And the local painter said that he saw Beethoven striding along, sketchbook in hand. Beethoven would stop, as if listening to something, then take out a pencil stub and jot something down on the page. He saw Beethoven climbing a hill across the valley, striding along with his broad-brimmed felt hat under his arm. When he got to the top of the hill, apparently he saw Beethoven lie down under a pine tree and stare at the sky for a long time. So that sounds like something you could do in Vermont. Probably some of you have. So you've at least done one thing that same way Beethoven did, if you did that. Beethoven's habits of going on these long walks in nature apparently date back to his childhood, which makes sense to me because maybe somebody who had so much, like Beethoven, who had so much trouble getting along with people, might look for comfort and inspiration in the natural world. Beethoven probably sketched more than any other composer, any other major composer anyway, in history. Sometimes he would go through a dozen different versions of a passage before settling on the right one, the one that seems so familiar to us today. I've really been fascinated by what these sketches reveal about Beethoven's creative process. For we can see what Beethoven decided to keep from a sketch, what he decided to discard or change, and exactly how he changed a section of a sketch. Beethoven would typically start with a little sketch, something very short and generally quite uninspired, just the germ of a simple rudimentary idea that really any composer could have written. But then he transforms this idea into something so distinctively different it takes your breath away. Somehow he makes it all meaningful and moving. I'm really struck by how the final version is not just 5 or 10 times better than the original sketch. It's 1,000 times better. There's some sort of qualitative leap, some sort of aha experience he must have had while composing that enabled him to really turn these original little sketches into true works of art. And learning about these transformations, these stages in Beethoven's creative workings has really increased my appreciation of his genius. And a great example of all of this, I think, are the sketches he made for his Tempest Sonata in D minor. The story of the sonata's nickname is supposed to be that some wag came up to Beethoven one day, said something like, Beethoven, this new sonata you just came out with in D minor, I just really don't get it. Can you help me to understand it a little better? And Beethoven said, probably just to get rid of the guy who was annoying him, he said gruffly, "Go read Shakespeare's Tempest." So that's how the sonata got its nickname, and we're now 200 years plus after it was composed, and the nickname has stuck, maybe because of the tempestuous, stormy nature of the music. That you'll hear that as we go along. The most famous part of the sonata is the finale, which is the third movement of the three. So I think that's a good place for us to start. We're going to dive in, get our feet wet, and start looking at some of these sonatas, sketches rather. And these sketches are on the second page of your handout. But before you hear these sketches, I want to play for you a little bit from the sonata so you kind of get the music in your brain a little bit. So what I'm going to play for you right now is actually not on your handout at all, but it's the final version of the beginning of the finale. About the first page of the beginning of this finale. You may recognize it, as I said, it's the most famous part of the sonata, but even if you don't, I'll give you some context as to what these sketches lead up to in his creative process. So here's a little bit from the finale. Sketches to share with you, and they're on the second page of your handout. These appear to be the preliminary ideas Beethoven had for the very beginning of this finale. And already present in these short sketches are three main musical ideas that found their way into the final version. And all three of these musical ideas are actually present in this first sketch. Idea number one is a rhythmic idea, and it's the idea of three rhythmic upbeats propelling you to a downbeat. What do I mean by this? A downbeat is the first beat of a measure. All the other beats of a measure are called upbeats. So if your rhythm is tootling along, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 1 is the downbeat. 2, 3, 4 are upbeats. And Beethoven's idea here is 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. Get it? Three rhythmic upbeats propelling you to a downbeat. And of course, the most famous example of Beethoven using this idea is, if you've heard of that one. And you know, it's 2, 3, 4, 1, so 3 upbeats going down to the downbeat. So that's idea number one. And in the sketch, you can hear this in my right hand. I'll play you the right hand just by itself. Well, I haven't played you the sketch yet. Let me play you the whole sketch. Both hands together. So here's sketch number one. Do you want to hear it again?
Yes.
Yeah, these sketches are pretty short, so I'm going to have to do a second time. Okay. So we have this notion of the three rhythmic upbeats propelling you to a downbeat. So in my right hand, you hear this. Right? Can you hear that? 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. What happened there at the end? He spread out the notes. He brought the speed down to half speed. It's the same rhythmic idea, actually, but each note is twice as long. So 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, slower version, 2, 3, 4, 1, but proportionately, it's exactly the same rhythmic idea. So that's idea number 1. Idea number 2 is a upward arpeggio in minor. Now, do you remember what an arpeggio is? So arpeggio was we were going to strum through that chord note by note. So he wants to do this in A minor. He's got an A minor chord. It's an A minor chord. It's got an A. It's got a C. It's got an E. It's got an A. So what he does here is he has little fragments of the notes of this A minor chord in both hands. So in the right hand you have C, E, A, C, E, A, and in the left hand you have A, C, E, A, C, E. So these little upward shoots, these little upward arpeggios, and they kind of overlap, I guess, intertwine, dovetail each other might be the best word. And that's what happens there. And in the final version of it, this is what it sounds like. We hear these rising arpeggio idea in the left hand. So here's the final version. The left hand. These are these little upward arpeggios. Here's the chord that they're based on. But we're going to arpeggiate it, so we're going to strum through it note by note like a guitarist. Putting it together with the right hand. So we've got this rising arpeggio in minor. That's idea number 2. And idea number 3 is one of repetition. We're going to do something 3 times, then on the 4th time vary it. So the repetitions will create a sense that the pattern is going to continue, kind of this expectation. But then he's going to dash you. He's going to surprise you with doing something different on the 4th phrase. So again, we go back to our sketch number 1 here. We have it in the right hand, this repetition idea. We're going to hear this 3 times. So repetition 1, repetition 2, repetition 3, and then something different to mix it up. And it's kind of nice what he does actually with the left hand, because right at that moment between when the repetitions are over, but before something new happens on the 4th time, he brings in this interesting chord in the left hand, right at that moment. Here we go. Okay, could you hear it? It's that kind of this interesting chord that's really a springboard, a cue. Use a theater term, I guess. It's a cue to this new material, this new idea that he's going to do for that something different, something varied that's going to happen. And that's sort of a nice little small touch that Beethoven throws into that sketch. So let's go down now to the middle sketch of the 3 that are on this page. So it's right in the middle of the page. Again, it's a short sketch. This one's a little different. It's in major. The piece is in minor, and most of the sketches are in minor, but this particular sketch actually isn't. It's in major. And it sounds like this. And it is notable because the first 4 notes of its melody have the exact same shape as the melody of the final version. It's this sort of interesting curved arabesque type shape. See if you can hear it. It's the first 4 notes of the sketch. Here's what the sketch sounds like. Want to hear it again? Play it for you again. So, the first 4 notes of the sketch. first four notes of the final version. Could you see I was just dropping it down, pretty much one note on the piano. There's the sketch. The exact same shape. Here's what the final version sounds like. Right? So this is really a very nice shape for the melody. The letter names are A, F, E, D, so it's kind of like that curved shape. Basically, the melody is going from A to D, but it overshoots it. It leaps up with this big leap all the way up to F, then it goes down a step to E, down another step to D. Right? You know the alphabet, right? You don't have to know music to know this. A, B, C, D, E, F. So E is one less than F, D is one less than E, so you're going down. A, F, down a step to E, down another step to D. Now in the original sketch, this theme is in major, and here in the final version it's minor. But the shape of the notes, the contour of the notes, is exactly the same in both the sketch and the final version. But other than this, Beethoven threw out everything else from the sketch. And there are plenty of other musical ideas on that line. But Beethoven regarded only this interesting melody shape of the first four notes as keepers. Now we could go down now to the third sketch on the page, which is down at the bottom of the handout on that second page. And here's what this sketch sounds like. What do we make of that? Well, on the plus side, the left-hand accompaniment is extremely close to what Beethoven used for his final version. In the final version, the left-hand accompaniment has this kind of almost like a Chopin-like shape to it. That's the final version, and here is what it sounds like in the sketch. Can you hear the similarities, right? There's just using the same notes, really. So the exact same notes. So some of the shape is very similar, it's kind of going upward. So that's one aspect of it. Also, this sketch contains a very beautiful and unusual idea. As the left hand is moving upward and approaching the middle of the keyboard, the right hand melody, which has been waiting here on this note, has almost a sense of blossoming and emerging from the accompaniment. The two are integrated. The line between accompaniment and melody has become blurred. This is, I think, a really beautiful idea, and he does it even better in the final version, where it is hard to tell if the first note of each of the melody phrases, hard to tell if that note is really part of the right-hand melody or the left-hand accompaniment. They're so close and so integrated with each other. So that might have been very interesting to Beethoven, that idea. However, there were some aspects to this sketch that Beethoven must have decided he didn't like. What were some of those problem spots? Well, one was in the melody, which I play in my right hand. It's very similar to the final version, except it has this kind of awkward hiccup note in the middle of the line. See if you can hear the difference. First, I'll play for you the final version of the melody. Okay? And here's the version in the sketch. Could you hear that in the middle? I call it that hiccup note. Play for you again. Kind of exaggerated, but that's the added note. And music, it's actually not called a hiccup note, it's called a appoggiatura. We like the Italian word. An appoggiatura is a weighted leading note, so that note really wants to resolve to its extremely close neighboring note on the piano, and that's what an appoggiatura is. But here it's just a hiccup. So he takes out this awkward note, and this leaves this more simpler, graceful phrase that we know today, and incidentally one that really fits the character of the left-hand accompaniment so much better. Right? This was that Chopin-like accompaniment. And that really fits it compared to with that kind of awkward note in the middle. So taking that out, good idea. He made another slight change, don't know if you noticed it, but he, in the sketch, the first note of the melodic line was lengthened. So you actually were hearing E, wait, C, B, A. And in the final version, it's simply E, C, B, A, which definitely flows better. Making the music flow better was also something he worked on for the left-hand music as well. So here again is what the left hand is doing. Right, that was the left hand in the sketch. The left hand here has static moments that are weak. It pushes off nicely enough, pushes forward in the first measure, but in the second measure, the left-hand music just treads water. It doesn't go anywhere. Go, stop. Go, stop. Now compare this to the final version, where the oar pushes the water every measure, not every other measure. Makes a real difference. Here's the final version. I mean, every measure has this eliminates those static moments and really gives the music its graceful flow. Right? So that's another way he improved the flow of this, make the music more graceful. All these three sketches that you see on the page, they're obviously extremely short. They're only one line long each. You can even tell visually how short they are. And really all this work Beethoven did sugared down to just what he would compose for really just a handful of measures at the beginning of the finale. Took all that work to get to there. Now we're going to go back and look at the final version. It's not on your handout, so just relax and listen. And I want to go back and look at what Beethoven ended up composing to follow up and develop this initial idea. So for measure 1, as we have heard, he opted for a rather simple version. And maybe this was kind of taking the best aspects he found in all three of the mini sketches we looked at. Kind of takes these best aspects, puts it together, and it's very simple measure 1. And do you remember how we had this idea way back when that we were going to repeat something 3 times and then do something a little different on the 4th time? And that's what he does here. He takes this opening figure and he repeats it 3 times. So first time, second time, third time. Now he takes, remember this melody had 4 notes, A, F, E, D. That was that kind of curved arabesque shape. He's going to switch the last 2 notes of the 4. Swap their order. So instead of A, F, E, D, when we get to measure 4, it's A, F, D, E. It's that slight difference. And he does something else. Can you hear that? He changed the harmony underneath it right at that moment where he changed slightly the shape of those opening 4 notes. That's measure 4. At measure 5, he takes the opening leap. Remember there was that big leap where we overshot the destination note? And he expands it by 1 note on the piano. So instead of leaping from A to F to begin the melody, now in measure 5 it's going to leap from A to G. Then it's going to go down 1 step as before, G to F, 1 letter less in the alphabet, down 1 more step to E. So he's kind of expanded this shape. Think of it like taffy, it's like silly putty or something, I don't know. You're just expanding that shape just a little bit. So, and now he's going to repeat this new, slightly expanded shape 3 times. Measure 6, measure 7. And now he's going to take these new 4 notes that he's just playing around with recently, and he's going to switch the last 2 notes of that. So instead of A, G, F, E, now it's A, G, E, F. That gets us up to measure 8. So you can see how he's just very gradually transforming the opening theme's 4 notes. It's very beautiful, very magical way. I'll just go on a little bit longer with you here. So in measure 9, he starts changing the shape, the contour. So we've been going on, we've been so far hearing a lot of going up, down, down, right? That was the shape of the curve, up, down, down. Now at measure 9, he goes up again, then down. Play with the left hand. Up, down, again, up, down, up, down. So these constantly evolving transformations serve to create this kind of spinning, whirling effect. Stunning diversity of shapes, constantly changing it, always related organically back to the opening 4-note theme. A, F, E, D, always related back to that very simple theme in the first measure, that kind of embryonic stem cell, you could call it. So we have here both unity and diversity. Truly wonderful music. So now that you've got your feet wet, you've got a little taste of what these sketches are like, now we're going to move to a longer sketch. If you go and turn to your 3rd page now, this is a sketch for the opening first movement. We're going to go all the way back in the sonata to the very beginning and spend some time there. And this is, I think in your handout, it's most of you, maybe all of you have it. It's going to be like this 11 by 17 sheet of paper that you kind of unfold like a book. So you have 2 facing pages. Maybe some of you might have it on 2 separate 8.5 pages that you have to kind of hold next to each other. But anyway, what this is an outline sketch, or what they call a synopsis sketch, of the entire first movement. Very simplified, kind of a skeletal thing, but you're going to hear little snippets, little fragments of themes, not much in the way of transitions between the melodies, but this sketch does have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it definitely sounds a lot more like music, like a piece of music than what we've heard so far. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a guided tour and play through for you. This is the sketch of the opening first movement of the Tempest Sonata. Here we go. Here's the second theme. Some transitional harmonies you must be thinking. D major marked dolce, which means sweetly. That's it. Some of these fragments are really short. Now, a final section which to my ears sounds like it's in the rhythm of a jig. Well, we know Beethoven actually really liked British Isles dance music, so maybe it is a jig. And you be the judge. Okay, that's the outline sketch. Now, Beethoven's basic idea is clear and is stated right at the outset. It's a rising arpeggio in D minor, the home key. Remember what the term arpeggio meant? We're strumming through the notes of a chord one by one. So this is a D minor chord. We're going to go through the notes one by one, and we're going to go up. So that's his basic idea. And he presents it right at the beginning of the sketch in this energetic but light and airy way. Kind of reminds me of Baroque music, Vivaldi perhaps. Now there's actually, this way of starting a piece of classical music actually has a name. It's called a Mannheim rocket. Apparently, yeah, that's great, the name. Apparently, in the city of Mannheim, there was an orchestra that was really great at playing fast, loud, energetic music. So if you wanted your symphony to get off to a rousing start, you'd write something like this. And it would be called a Mannheim rocket theme. Now, I want to, well, let's see, you hear that theme at the beginning of the sketch. I also wanted to briefly mention, you also hear that theme at the very end of the sketch. Remember, there was that kind of silly, bouncy jig, and the jig was in 6 beats per measure. Right, that's the exact same notes of the Mannheim rocket theme of the beginning. So he brought it back at the end of the sketch. Well, let me play for you now, for comparison, the final version's first page. And those of you who wish to follow along, this is the last page of your handout. But we'll be coming back to the sketch. But you can take a look at that if you'd like. And you will definitely hear how much he has transformed the ideas of this sketch, and it's quite different, as you will hear. So here's the first page of the Tempest Sonata. Original theme in the sketch, the Mannheim rocket theme, was placed fairly high up in the piano's range. Definitely something that I would play with my right hand. And what Beethoven did is he took this and he moved it down, 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 way down, all the way to the very extreme bass for my left hand to play. Giving it weight, seriousness, depth. So that's one change he made. Another change he made that, well, let's see. This moment right here is measure 21 in the final version, and this seems to correspond, I guess, to measure 1 of the sketch. So he decided to move the presentation of the whole Mannheim Rocket theme away from the beginning. I think this is absolutely brilliant. He moves it down to measure 21. Why does he do this? Because before you hear the Mannheim Rocket theme, he wants you to hear instead a very intriguing introduction. And this introduction contains some of the most unusual atmospheric music Beethoven ever composed. Starts like this. Very slow music, suspended, mysterious. A sense of anticipation. What's going to happen next? Then suddenly, some extremely fast, unstable music, which just as suddenly stops in its place. Again, some of the very slow, hypnotic music. And again, a fast interruption, but this time it doesn't stop. It goes on, creating a great arc of sound, going up to a high peak, then cascading down dramatically to the very bottom of the piano. Now, right at this moment here, this is measure 21, that's the entrance of the theme down in the low bass. Right here, Beethoven composed this fascinating piano texture, much more interesting than the rather plodding texture he created at the beginning of the sketch. Remember, the sketch began with that music that I said was kind of a little bit like Vivaldi, but not really as good. Not great. Here's his new version. What's going on here? His idea is to have a call and response around a third agitated inner element. A call and response around a third agitated inner element. Okay, that's a lot of jargon to take in. Let me break it down for you by playing each of my hands separately so you can hear all the different layers of the texture one by one. Then we'll put it all together. So we'll start with my right hand. It's doing that agitated inner element. It sounded like this. And this is a rhythmic idea of groups of 6 notes that can be heard as either 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or a play the exact same notes, or you can look at it as 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Right, they both add up to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And many years later, Leonard Bernstein used this same idea in his famous song, America in West Side Story, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, in the Bernstein, this rhythmic idea was meant to be fun, of course. But here in the Beethoven, this interesting ambiguity of the 3 and the 2 is meant to be unsettling. It's meant to add to the tempestuous nature of the music. We hear this stream of notes, but we don't really know if they're supposed to be in 3s or in 2s. It's unclear, so the music has this unstable character. That's the right hand. Now my left hand does the call and response that I was talking about. So it starts with the left hand playing low down. That's the call, and then in the soprano, that's the response. And that's all played by my left hand. And to achieve that trademark Beethovenian dramatic contrast, he makes the call and the response as different as possible from each other. Remember how I said textures in Beethoven are brilliantly defined? So there's another good example of it. The call, all the calls in this section are strong with big bounding notes that really leap from one note to the next. The response, the call and response, the response is soft, expressive, and each note always moves only to a neighboring note on the piano. So the opposite of a leap, really the closest possible motion. Okay? It's soft, expressive, and moving just to those very neighboring notes on the piano. So a real contrast between the call and the response. And my left hand is actually crossing back and forth like a windshield wiper to play all this over my right hand, exciting, pulsating music in the middle. So here's what it sounds like with all of these different layers put together. So, when you heard the opening introduction, you heard, as I said, that great curved sound that goes way up to the high note of the actually was the highest note of Beethoven's piano at the time, and it descends down into the extreme bass. I might as well play it for you. Introduction sort of elides into, and it joins into this call and response section with all the excitement and the crisscrossing and the windshield wipers and all that at this measure 21 moments. So just all of these different transformations brilliantly done by Beethoven. And it's not just interesting musical things. He's also changed the character, right? So the original sketch had that kind of very light, energetic music, and now that has all been discarded in favor of this heavier, mysterious, weightier type of music, and that's what's taking over here. So now we go back to the outline sketch, if you want to go back, if you would like. Go back to that third page of the handout. And when Beethoven was looking over this outline sketch, he must have decided that it had some problems and that he had to change some things. And what did he change in this outline sketch? Well, one problem spot was, it's about halfway down the first page, and it's this little thing that is the beginning of a second theme. The Mannheim Rocket, that's the first theme. Sonata C should have a second theme, and he started writing one in B flat major. Play it for you again. This was lovely enough, but rather lightweight and out of place now in this super intense universe that Beethoven had created for the introduction and the first theme. So he took away this theme that I just played for you in B flat major. He writes a different theme in A minor. Well, it's hardly a theme at all, to be honest, but just some more turbulent music in this kind of agitated style of the first theme. The second theme and the first theme really aren't all that different in character. So here's a little bit of what the second theme sounds like in this revision. Okay? Another place he thought needed revision was on the second page, near the top on the right of the second page of this outline sketch. Remember there was this little thing that I called, well, this is little short passage in D major. I kind of joked about how short it really was. Which he marked dolce, sweetly in Italian. And of course, as you can imagine, this too had to hit the scrap heap because he decided, really judged this to be out of character for this new mood that he had settled in on, that this is what this sonata was going to be about. So he threw out this theme in D major, but he didn't give up on the idea of having an episode at this point in the structure of the movement's form. But what he decided to do instead of this D major idea at this point was really quite daring. He replaced it with a recurrence of the beginning of the opening introductory material. Brings that back. Actually, there are several places dotted in different points of this opening first movement where he brings back for a surprise that slow, mysterious opening introductory type music. But here, at this particular recurrence of it, things really get spooky. He has me hold for a very long time this arpeggiated chord. He has me hold this with my foot pedal, which serves to blur the sound. So when I start to keep playing, it goes on like that, and it starts to sound like the effect of the reverb of a giant cathedral as I just keep my foot pedal down, and everything is just sort of blurring in there. Plus, he's kind of overlaid on top of this whole idea these super expressive lines that are operatic in nature. In opera, they're called recitatives, actually. So it's just this crazy, crazy moment that definitely one of Beethoven's strangest compositional ideas ever. But that D major idea was too pretty. he wanted something mysterious and eerie. That would be really the best word for it. And so the music that he wrote for this moment in the structure, although strange, it actually fits. Finally, that last section that I commented sounded to me like a jig in 6 beats per measure. Well, that too had to go because he really wanted to unify the dramatic motion and drive of the movement as a whole. So that too went, but he replaced it with a new, wonderfully original ending, full of my left hand rumbling about in the extreme low region of the piano. So I'm shortly going to play for you through the entire first movement. When you start hearing my left hand rumbling all the way down at the bottom, you'll know we're on the home stretch. There's a pattern here to these changes. Beethoven throughout is taking all these lyrical moments and he's methodically excising. He's throwing out all the lyrical moments and always replacing with this sort of darker material. Beethoven eventually wrote another whole synopsis sketch, another whole outline, fresh outline that has really fleshes out more some of the transitions. It specifies more some of the harmony progressions and the like, but of course we don't have time to go through all the drafts. I just wanted to give you here tonight a little peek into Beethoven's compositional studio, a little idea of what made Beethoven tick as a composer, how he took his original musical thoughts, most of them quite uninspired and humdrum, but how he took these original thoughts and transformed them magically into something that all these years later is so meaningful and moving to us today. So with all that as background, I'm going to play for you now as a straight performance the entire first opening movement of Beethoven's Tempest Sonata. And of course I'm going to play for you the final version, the one we know today, the end point of Beethoven's long creative journey. So here goes. always try to build in some time in these first Wednesdays programs for some question and answers. So I am actually almost blind, so I cannot see hands raised, but maybe people could either just bark out or somebody could help me with that.
Go on, go ahead.
Does studying the sketches change the way that you played the finished piece?
Yes, I think they do.
Can you repeat?
Okay. The question was, does studying the sketches change the way you would perform the pieces? And yeah, I think just like that wag, who went up to Beethoven and tried to get Beethoven to explain his sonata. I mean, we're always totally curious as to what goes through these great composers' minds. And in classical music, the composer is God, and the performers we're way down here in the hierarchy of things. So yeah, any information we can get about the composer's intentions or some of the logic, like I say, just sort of knowing, in that sketch what he decided to keep, what he decided to throw away, how he had that, and he decided to get rid of that offending note in the middle. So you really have to think that, he really wants to make this a smooth line, because he took out that kind of awkward note that used to be there. So yeah, I think it helps. I think it probably influenced me, and sometimes you can really see the structure of a piece by looking through the sketches.
Yes.
I was curious about a couple of things that you mentioned. One was the left hand crossing over the right, and the other was pulling down the pedal to sort of create the reverb. And I'm wondering, was he the first one who sort of used these, or was it kind of common at the time already?
The crosshand stuff was very common, and it's a famous composer, Domenico Scarlatti, who wrote pieces for the harpsichord, and you're constantly like crossing over. Seems like it is mostly the left hand crossing over the right, but it could be either way. So crosshand technique dates back at least to the 1700s, probably further. And Beethoven was writing these pieces in the early 1800s. The holding down the pedal, yeah, I think he probably was the first to do that. And it's well known that the pianos of that time were not as sonorous as the pianos of today. So it wasn't a very big cathedral sound back then, but compared to what a modern Steinway can deliver. But no, yeah, definitely. I mean, he marked where he wanted the pedal to start and where he wanted the pedal to stop. And I think he was definitely the first composer to do that I know of. So a little bit of an innovator there.
Other questions?
Do we know how long it took to compose, to finish this particular Tempest sonata?
That I don't know actually, yeah. Sorry. I know there was one piece he wrote near the end of his life that took him a whole year, the Hammerklavier Sonata, which is number 29 of the 32. I think this one is number 17, so it's earlier. And he churned them out much more quickly when he was younger. And of course, when he was in his 20s, he had a career reason to write them, I suppose, because he could perform them. Then when he went deaf around age 30 or so, then I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but his production did go down and each piece would take him longer. I know when I was studying the last three sonatas for my performing them last year, he had, there's correspondence with him and his publisher. He got a deal to do 3 sonatas. And he said, oh yeah, I'll deliver the 3 sonatas to you in 6 months. And because he was trying to get the advance, so he was trying to get the money. And I think he knew he wasn't going to finish these last great 3 sonatas that he wrote at the end of his life in 6 months. He kind of got one done pretty much in 6 months, but even that one he revised a little, and it basically took him 2 years to write 3. So yeah, he wasn't Mozart. Mozart could dip off these sonatas and symphonies in a couple of weeks, but that wasn't, because of all the sketching, because of all the reworking and the changing of things. I think it took him months, not weeks.
One more question? In the back?
Have you ever played these on original pianos on the period?
No. The closest I ever came was at a historical instrument exhibition in Boston. They had an example of like the first piano. It was a replica, but it was from, the first piano was around 1720, so about 100 years before this. And I got to play. It was like the talk of the exhibition. Everybody everyone wanted to play. So I got to play it, and it was fun, but totally different feel from a modern piano. But I've never actually played a piano that was specifically more of Beethoven's own time. There are all sorts of interesting stories about Beethoven trying to get the instrument makers to make louder pianos. And the reason was because he was not 100% deaf. So he was hoping that a louder piano, he might be able to hear something. He had this thing called an ear trumpet, which slightly amplified the sound. And he tried to kind of rig it up so like it would be like perched over the strings of the instrument, because he had some other kind of resonating cavity, and he was trying different things to see if he could possibly hear a little bit of the piano. But most people assume that, since visitors always said, "Wow, Beethoven piano, your piano is really out of tune," that he probably couldn't hear much. But he had this interesting correspondence that survived with the piano manufacturers, that he was happy when one of this English manufacturers sent him a piano, and it was a little bit louder, so he was jumping for joy at that. So I'm going to, unless there's one more? Yeah, we got one.
Cornelia, did you have your hand up?
I want to for myself, and I'm sure for others.
Yeah.
Thank you for your teaching, which enhances so much with beautiful performance.
You said it better than I could. I was going to say it was a wonderful educational and artistic evening.
Good.
Is there the opportunity to buy CDs, Lucinda?
I think they set it on. I'm not sure where exactly, but
In the back on the way out?
I know.
Thank you all for
Gonna be
making
there.
this a wonderful first Wednesday here in Norwich, and we look forward to seeing you next month for whatever is on the docket for that. Lovely to have you all here.